streaming. I'm really glad that you can join us and make us. We're still in the Bible study of Philippians. I'm going to go a bit more about that, but I'm just grateful to be here. I'm excited by a lot of things. We had a good men's meeting, despite the fact that we didn't know if we were going to have any food, right? I think Troy had fallen sick or something, and so right in the middle, where there's a change of plans, so we had a late start, but that allowed us to have some introductions and introduce ourselves. I'm really going to start working on both on the men's and the women's. It's like getting it posted on Facebook or in the run-up, so we're trying to increase the audience. Yeah, I know we've got a Facebook page, right? But oh, you have. Oh, so you are one-upping us. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so we got to one-up them. I will have a dedicated web page by the end of the week. No, I'm just kidding. All right. Well, I could do that pretty quickly and get it one stood up, But I think that for us men, there's a real need for the men to get going, right? And we talked about it on Monday, and it's really, it's up to us to keep inviting people. It's not just for this church, right? That's what the thing that we're trying to say. It's for other people to come and be part of, right? Men encouraging men, and I just want the men to start stepping up and find some encouragement and strength in each other so that we can make a difference in this church and make a difference out there. But I'm encouraged, and we got to hear from each other. We got to hear Jim playing the guitar. So that was good, and we heard Gerald. Gerald's got an amazing testimony, and it's encouraging. And I'm encouraged about what's happening here, right? I believe that the atmosphere is changing. I keep saying to somebody, there's this song by Elevation Worship. I can never remember it, but it says the atmosphere is changing. The Spirit of the Lord is here, right? I really feel that sometimes, that the atmosphere is starting to change in here. And I'm excited. We're going to be known as a praying church. Get ready. And on Sunday, just get ready for Sunday, because I'm going to be teaching from John 17, which is the great intercessory prayer of Jesus, right? And hopefully I can line some ducks up in a row and I can make an announcement when we're going to have a night of prayer, because I want a night of prayer. So, you know what I mean? And it's likely that we probably do that on a Wednesday night, right? Because I've got you captive already here, right? And then I'll lock the doors and won't let you leave, right? But anyway, so we're back in Philippians 2. We spent the last 3 weeks really in Philippians 2, and it's some of the deepest theology in Scripture. Remember in verses 1 to 4, it's that call to humility, and then in verses 5 to 11, we were talking about having the mind of Christ, and last week it was 12 to 18 about a life that pours out. And tonight, right, we're going to close out the chapter with something very simple, right? Two friends we're going to look at. So what Paul was doing for us over this last week, what Paul was doing, he was bringing the teaching back down to us. So he was giving the people of Philippi the engine that they needed, that God works in you, that you work out what he's working in you, and it's a partnership, and it's not about responding to pressure. But he also named a threat, right, to the church. If you remember, right, what we were talking about, the threat to the church is that grumbling that goes on. Remember, we talked about the Israelites grumbling when they're in the, and I've just been reading this all through Exodus, right, Leviticus and Numbers, right, and I'm into Deuteronomy now, and I've just seen that all they did was grumble. And I think that when you start to grumble, and when I've heard that moaning and grumbling in other churches, that normally starts to be the death, unless it's actually nipped in the bud, that starts to be the death of a church, right? Because it's just that whispering campaign that goes on. And then he gave them a picture, right? I think I said about lights in the dark, that the light doesn't try to be a light, it's just a light, right? It doesn't try to be anything, it just shines. And what he showed them, what a life, right, a life in Christ of being a light actually looks like. There's a cost involved in that. And that cost is like a life poured out, a drink offering, right? We talked about a joy in the emptying of ourselves. That was a lot to carry in that last week, right? And so, no, what he's going to do here, he's not going to pile on any more teaching to us, but he's now going to see what it looks like in real flesh and blood by naming two men, right? So, when I was trying to, prepare for this, I think what I started to think about is what I really feel like Paul understands some things about people, right? Because it's one thing to teach people truth, but it's another thing to point at someone who's living it. And it's usually the second one, when we see somebody living it, that has an impact on us and has an effect that it starts to change within us. We can, right, and I've heard a lot of sermons about humility, but I could preach and teach hundreds of sermons about humility, and none of you may not be moved at all. But I think if you spend an hour or even 30 minutes with somebody who's a humble person, I think something shifts within you, right? Because I think that real people tend to teach us more than ideas or anything that I'm going to bring to you in a teaching session. Just simply sitting with someone and being in their presence has an effect. I've had a couple of people in my life who've been like to me. And I think, pretty much if I were to ask you, I could ask you, who are those people for you? And I think you could name some, right? Michelle, Jim, right? And I think most of you would say Jim in here, right? But I think all of us have, at some point in our walk with God, have come across those people who have made such a profound impact in your life. And that just spending that little minute with them, that time, has an effect on you. The Spirit convicts you in such ways, right? You just feel their presence. For me, back in the day, it was Pastor Mark. It was infectious, just being around him. He was a worshiper. He played the guitar and he led worship, but just being around him. He's the one who taught me everything I needed to know about how it was to be a father. He was more of a father to me than my own father, right, who was absent most of the time. And that wasn't necessarily my dad's fault. He was just an Air Force pilot. That was the nature of his career. But I learned more from Pastor Mark by spending 18 months living with them and just being in their presence and actually seeing people live this thing. Because it's one thing saying that I'm a believer and I'm a follower, right? But when you get behind closed doors, what are you really like? And he was a man who greatly impacted my life. I say this a lot, right? He was the one who just handed me the toilet brush and said, "Pastor that," because he saw me as a pastor before I even saw it, because I'm still convinced I was an evangelist. I'm chasing bears. I'm going to catch bears, and you can deal with the bears that I'm going to bring into this church. That was my heart. But he saw something in me that I didn't see. And then I've had those people in my life, right, those ones that kept showing up year after year after year, when I was probably, at some of my points, probably one of the most unlovable people you could have met, right? Because that was just the nature of what was going on in my life at the time. But there was those people who kept showing up for me, kept showing up for me, kept showing up for me. And there was these men, right, and there was one or two of them who just by showing up and just looking at their life, that was like, I want that kind of life. I want to be like that. And what Paul is going to do right for us right now, he's going to introduce us to two of those men. They were two men who lived everything that Paul had been trying to teach for the last two chapters. So if you go around and ask some people who have walked with God for a very long time, who shaped your life the most? I think most people don't necessarily name a famous teacher. I think that they tend to name a very specific person, right? Maybe For some of you, it was a grandmother right, whose prayers kept rolling over and over and rolling over and over, who had an impact on you. Those friends, like I talked about, who stayed when everybody left me, I had 2 or 3 of those who never gave up on me. Those mentors who didn't say much, but when you looked at their lives, you could see that they were living something differently. Man, those pastors that show up on the worst days. So they name people whose lives they got to watch up close. And through watching those lives, something may be formed or changed in them that was positive. And Paul knows that. So after a chapter of full, deep theology and a kind of a direct exhortation, he doesn't end with a powerful summary. He doesn't end with a final big idea and say, this is how it is. What he does, he's going to end with 2 friends, 2 specific people. And these were 2 real people that the Philippians already knew. Because these 2 people were living everything that Paul had been teaching. And in showing them these 2, he says, look, this isn't just a theory. This is what it actually looks like. And people actually saw it being lived out. So we're going to go meet these two men, right? So I'm going to read from verses 19 to 24, please. If the Lord Jesus is willing, I hope to send Timothy to you soon for a visit. Then he can cheer me up by telling me how you are getting along. I have no one else like Timothy who genuinely cares about your welfare. All the others care only for themselves and not for what matters to Jesus Christ. But you know how Timothy has proved himself. Like a son with his father, he has served with me in preaching the good news. I hope to send him to you just as soon as I find out what is going to happen to me here. And I have confidence from the Lord that I myself will come to see you soon. So Paul, as I said, has been teaching for this entire chapter. He's been teaching some big themes, right? Christ's descent, God working in them in the church at Philippi. He's talked about lights in the dark. He's talked about drink offerings. And now what he's doing, he's going to talk just about a friend. But watch what he says about Timothy here. I have no one else like Timothy who genuinely cares about your welfare. I have no one else like him. You've got to understand that Paul has a lot of people around him. He's surrounded by believers in Rome. He has helpers, and visitors, and he has a community around him. But what he says, I have no one else like Timothy. Why does Paul say that? I think there's 2 things. Firstly, he genuinely cares about you. And when you, in this context, is the church in Philippi. He doesn't care in a polite way. Oh, how you doing, right? In passing, right? We do that sometimes when we go and meet people and we're being polite. Oh, how are you? Right? Half the time we don't probably want the answer, really. Right? It's not about the way someone cares while they're standing in front of you, but forget everything that you ever say the moment you get out of my space. Have you met people like that? Yep. The word that Paul uses it suggests soul-level care, the kind that doesn't fade when it's inconvenient to me, the kind that doesn't stop when there's no reward in it for me, and the kind that keeps going on because it actually loves you. And secondly, and this one stings a little bit, all the others care only for themselves and not what matters to Jesus Christ. That's a hard sentence right there. Because Paul isn't talking about pagans here, unbelievers. He's talking about the believers who were around him. People who maybe said the right things. Have you met people who say the right things? because they just say the right things because they think that's the thing they have to say. People who know maybe some church language about oh, Jesus cares for you, right? Those kind of people. These were people who were part of the community that Paul was speaking to. But underneath all of that surface, a lot of them were living for themselves. And Paul, right, this is one of his deepest letters. Paul, in the middle of all this letter, right, is quietly admitting something very honest. Even in this world, true Christ-shaped people are very rare. People talk a lot about it, but to actually be around people who really live it, that's pretty rare. And what he's saying is that Timothy was one of these very few people. And I made a note right here that some people learn the message, others become the message. And then what Paul goes and says next, he really starts to talk about the depth of his relationship with Timothy. Like a son with his father, he served me. I want you to think about what that means. At this point, Timothy and Paul have been traveling for some time together, right? Years. He met him on a missionary journey probably 10 years ago or before in Lystra. He took him on as a young man. He taught him. He trained him. It was like his apprentice, right? He sent him on assignments because he could trust him enough to go on assignments. And he even suffered with him. Then somewhere along the way, and this is what Mark meant to me, Pastor Mark, Paul became a spiritual father to Timothy. And Timothy became a faithful son to Paul. Now, I'm not saying that was the level of my relationship with Pastor Mark, but there was a relationship with Pastor Mark that was deep, right? That he saw beyond all of my failures. He trusted me with things. We started to try to build a vision together of what the church was going to be like in Fort Worth. He treated me just like a son. In fact, I found out later that when I was struggling with what my biological son back in England, some of the stuff that he had been saying about me, and he had every reason to say some of the things he said, you understand. Without knowing it, Pastor Mark called him from the United States and called him in England to speak it to him, you know, to tell him and to try to soften his heart, right? That made an impact. I didn't find that out till later because he wasn't one to say, I did this. He was one who just cared deeply. And he was to be in his presence. I was actually, this week, somebody in Fort Worth that I knew who was, Pastor Mark was involved in 3 churches, and I was involved in 2 of those 3 churches. But the church before where Mark was commissioned to be pastor, one of the other pastors there just passed away this week. And it shot up onto my Facebook. And then one of the people from that time, who are friends of mine that I have a great love and respect for, they played a video from, I think it was probably 2008. And there was Pastor Mark on the stage singing one of the most beautiful songs that when we were building the website together, that song was playing all the time on the website, right? And he was there with his immutable self, just like playing and just worshiping. And it took me back a little minute, right? It stirred some emotion in me. Not bad emotion, good emotion. He passed away in 2020 with COVID. He died of COVID. But there's a man who that was the level of relationship. And this relationship that he's talking about here between Timothy and Paul is even deeper than that. And so if that relationship had such an impact with me in my life, I can only imagine what this relationship was like, yeah? I made a note here that there was no, like with me and Pastor Mark, there was no biological tie. There was no biological tie between Paul and Timothy. There was no legal claim that you are my son and I'm your father. Like, was it Luke Skywalker? Right? Luke, I am your father, right? There was just years. Sorry, was that? What was that? I am your father, yeah. There was just years of shared life together, shared mission, shared cost. For me, with Pastor Mark, it was a shared vision for how the church should be in Fort Worth, right? And we were just excited, and a lot of the work that you're seeing, that you'll start seeing from me, was birthed out of that I have written down visions and just a call for God, right, to touch people's lives. That kind of relationship doesn't form quickly. It forms slowly through those ordinary days, right? And even those days when sometimes I would get mad at him and he'd get mad at me. Right? Those are the hard seasons sometimes. Paul went through that. Through those long stretches of quiet faithfulness, because we had a shared vision, and Paul and Timothy had a shared vision. And Paul now is willing to send Timothy, to send him at his own cost, because Timothy is the most precious resource that Paul has near him at this moment. And here's the depth. So if you understand that level of relationship, that shows you how much care that Paul had about the Philippians, because he cares more about them than his own comfort, that he's willing to send somebody that he considers his son. And he's going to send the one person that he can't afford to lose. But that is a Christ-lived life. For me, that's a Christ-shaped life lived out. That's what verse 4 actually looks like. Look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. Paul was living that by sending Timothy. And Timothy lived it by going. Let's jump to 25 to 30, please. So the next man that we've come across is going to be Epaphroditus. And I probably butchered that too. I'm good at butchering words, right? So let's go. Meanwhile, I thought I should send Epaphroditus back to you. He is a true brother, co-worker, and fellow soldier. And he was your messenger to help me in my need. I am sending him because he has been longing to see you, and he has been very distressed that you heard he was ill. And he certainly was ill. In fact, he almost died. But God had mercy on him and also on me, so that I would not have one sorrow after another. And so I am all the more anxious to send him back to you, for I know you will be glad to see him, and then I will not be so worried about you. Welcome him in the Lord's love and with great joy, and give him the honor that people like him deserve. For he risked his life for the work of Christ, and he was at the point of death while doing for me what you couldn't do from far away. So this is the second person, the second friend. And this would have had an impact on them, because Epaphroditus was from Philippi. He was one of their own. They had sent him in the first place as a gift to Paul, right, to help take care of Paul while he was in prison. That's why Epaphroditus was there, Epaphroditus. He was their messenger. And notice that Paul gave him 3 titles in this letter. He said, a true brother, a co-worker, and a fellow soldier. Notice how those build up, those 3 titles build up. A brother first, that's family, shared by blood. A co-worker is something that is shared by mission. A fellow soldier is something that is shared by danger. So each title becomes heavier than the last. And by the time that Paul says fellow soldier, he's saying, we've been in the trenches together. We've taken hits together. We've stood our ground together. That's not a casual friendship. That's someone who has been in the fight with them. Have any of you had those people in your lives who've been in the fight with you, in the trenches? A strong bond between you because they have stood the test with you? I know I've had those people in my life. But then what Paul starts to do, he starts to tell the rest of the story to us about Epaphroditus. Oh, I'll get this word right in a minute. Epaphroditus. It's that Ephaph. Is it Epaphroditus? Epaphroditus. Maybe I'll change. Epaphroditus? Epaph.
Just say Jimbo.
It doesn't matter, just whatever it is. Edward. Ed. Yes, I'll call him Edward. So Edward, he's telling us the rest of the story, that he certainly was ill. In fact, he almost died. Epaphroditus got sick. Not just sick, because we all get sick sometimes. He almost died. That's sick, right? They don't say in here what the illness was. Some scholars have suggested that was exhaustion from the trip, from the long journey to Rome. Others have said that he got caught in the prison environment. Either way, whatever the reason, he got close to death, losing his life. And there's an interesting turn in this story, right? Look at what he was distressed about. He was very distressed that you heard he was ill. So he wasn't distressed because he was sick. He wasn't distressed because he was distressed because the Philippians heard that he was sick. And he didn't want them to worry about him. I can only imagine, right? Think about this. He almost died. There is no medical system like we have over here. You couldn't just run him to Mercy, right? And run a series of tests on him. When people are dying in those times, they typically died most of the time. No health care. And in this point, when he's almost dying, what was on his mind? It wasn't himself. It was about them, Philippi. Now, I had COVID in the really first part of 2020 when everybody was getting COVID. I got it, and I have no immune system. I have lupus, right? So I have no immune system. And I was sick. And when I mean sick, I was sick. I thought I was going to die, right? Literally. But I also have a stubborn refusal to go to the hospital because I'm a man, right? I would say something, it's just a flesh wound, right? No, I was sick. And I'm going to tell you that in that moment when I was sick, and I've been sick, maybe seriously sick, 2 or 3 times in my life. One of them was when I had cancer, when they gave me a death sentence, right? And the other time, and I'm going to speak more about that on Sunday, but the other time was this, when I got sick. And the last thing on my mind was not what you were up to and what you were doing or anybody in my life was doing. I didn't care, right? Wayne was dying. And I wanted everybody to know that Wayne was dying. I'm not a very quiet patient, Lisa. But I wouldn't go to the hospital either, right? That's how stubborn and obstinate I am. I think that's where most of us naturally go. We don't think about others in the moment that we're sick. For me, I went inward. I got focused on myself. And to be honest, I got a little bit scared. Both times. But what happened here was that he was thinking about everyone else's worry about him, right? He was worried about them worrying about him. That would have been the last thing on my mind. That's verse 4 yet again. That is the mind of Christ in flesh and blood. You know, and I've just said it makes you wonder. I know what was on my mind when I was really sick. If I'm facing something hard, right, who would I be thinking about? If I was emptied out, what would that empty and reveal about me? I'm a whiner. I know that. That's what it reveals about me. I'm a whiner. I'm just going to whine. And then Paul, right, he gets to this line that lands the hardest. For he risked his life for the work of Christ. The Greek word that Paul uses here, and I'm really going to mess this one up, so get ready for this one. Paraboluo, my. Paraboluomai, right? Emphasis on the lu. Paraboluomai. That word there, it's a gambling word. It means literally to throw the dice. To stake everything on that one move. To leave everything on the table. To put even on your own life on the table. That word was used, right, in the ancient world for gamblers and for soldiers who would expose themselves to certain risks. And that's what Paul said that Epaphroditus did here. He gambled his life. For what? It wasn't for fame, I know that. It wasn't for survival, not even for himself, but doing for me what you couldn't do from far away. Think about what's happening here. The Philippians wanted to help Paul, but they were far away and he was stuck in prison. So they sent the only thing they could send, a man. And that man took the gift, made the dangerous journey, served Paul in his time of need, and got sick while doing it and almost died. And when he finally was well enough to say, enough to go home, he didn't say, oh, I've done enough now. He didn't ask for any kind of recognition. He just wanted to get back to Philippi so that it would stop worrying about him. That's amazing. Epaphroditus didn't preach a sermon on being poured out. He actually lived one. I wanted to see what Paul has just done, right? Last week in verse 17, he said, I am being poured out as a drink offering. And then he points at Epaphroditus and said, here's a man who almost was poured out. Verse 17 wasn't, man, I'm nearly close to the end of this. Okay. So let's see what Paul has done. This whole chapter, chapter 2, has been one of the deepest in all of Scripture. It's about Christ emptying himself. It was Christ at the cross, God exalting him, every knee bowing, working out what God works in to our lives, being about lights in the dark, drink offerings being poured out. And how does Paul end this? Not with a powerful summary, not with any final big ideas. He ended it with two people who were friends to him. A young protege and a very sick messenger. I asked myself, why did Paul do that? Why did he end on that particular chapter? Because I think Paul knew something that we tend to forget. Doctrine is necessary, but doctrine alone doesn't change us. But examples do. And if you have living examples in your life, right, like this, then it has an impact. If you wonder what verse looks like, you've got to go and look at Timothy. If you want to know what verse 17 looks like, you've got to look at Epaphroditus, right? So what he is saying is, don't just take my word for what a Christ-shaped life is. Look at these two men. These two men with the living embodiment of it. And here's the thing that really should encourage us in the middle of all this. None of these men were superstars. They were just ordinary men. Timothy was that young man that Paul had been invested in for years. And all Epaphroditus was just a courier carrying a gift to him. And none of them is measured in any way that we measure fame, right? They haven't written books. They haven't been on a book tour. They haven't been the headline at a conference. They didn't have anybody following them like on social media. But what they were just faithful servants. Faithful. In specific places with specific people at a real cost to themselves. And Paul wrote their names down in chapter 2 so that 2,000 years later, we'd still know about them. That is what a Christ-shaped life leaves behind. Not a platform, but a legacy, right? Of small, faithful, costly love. And there are some people that I've watched. I've watched those people who can be a friend who genuinely cares. I've seen those people here. They're the people who show up when others won't. They're the ones who'll take that dangerous trip if necessary, so that someone can be served. Those are the ones who look not only to their own interests, but to the interests of those who are standing right in front of them. I've watched that at work in this church, and that encourages me. That's not giving any of you any extra credit. I just want to name it. That's discipleship. That's real discipleship in action right there. That's what it looks like to look like Christ. And I've watched it in here. And that is such an encouraging thing. This church is in good shape, y'all. Because I know that there are people that sit in this room who genuinely care, who genuinely love, and who genuinely want to reach out and touch people and change people's lives. That's what living a Christ life like means. So as always, I like to leave you with some questions. I want you to sit with these. You can even shout out some answers if you want, right? Sometimes I like this to be interactive, and let me just pull this up so, right? It's actually behaved itself pretty good this time. Say that again? Who in my life has been my Timothy? And have I ever thanked them for it? Ha. Who am I being a Timothy to in someone else's life? Where is God asking me or you to gamble something for someone else's good? Willing to make that sacrifice? And this is the harder one for a lot of people. Where is God calling me to serve quietly without recognition? Repeat it. I'll shout it loud for you. Did you get the first three? Yes. Where is God calling me to serve quietly without recognition? And that's the hardest one, right? That's the one when Pastor Mark handed me the toilet brush and told me to clean toilets. Quietly, without the need to be seen. I cleaned a lot of toilets. The thing that I made, that I left right at the end was that I don't have to be a Paul, I just have to be a Timothy, or I have to be an Epaphroditus, where God has put me in my life. So that's all I have. I managed to finish early. That's okay, yes it is. And I want to bounce some things off you, right? So I said on Sunday I'm going to be in John 17, right? And John 17 is the intercessory prayer of Jesus. And one of the things that I've said that I want this church to be, I want this church to be a praying church. And what I have said is that I want to have a night of prayer. And so that's, and then it's the logistics of trying to find when we can have a night of prayer, right? And the more I've been thinking about it, I was thinking, why don't we turn one of the Wednesday nights, we can have maybe a short Bible study, but then go into a night of prayer. What do I mean by a night of prayer? Well, it starts and it ends when it ends, right? And so I'm looking for some feedback. So I was thinking, right, that maybe either next Wednesday or the Wednesday after we have a night of prayer. So the Wednesday night, we would turn that into like 6:30 to whenever it ends, right? Because there's a lot I want to pray about. I want us to become a very praying church. I want to pray for the people in this church, for us as individuals. I want us to pray for leadership in this church. I want us to pray for relationships in this church, that they build and they get stronger, that ministries would rise up. Because I'm going to tell you, the kind of person that I am is that if you see a need in this church, I'm going to ask you, fulfill the need. And I'll support you, right? I'm not one of these that will I will mentor you, but I'm not necessarily going to micromanage you. If you see the need for a ministry, fulfill the need for the ministry. And I will support you 100%. And God will either be in it or he won't. But I'm going to allow that. That's my vision. That somewhere then out here, ministries will raise up all over the place, and we're going to be an active part of it. But all of that does not start until we start and lay the foundation of prayer. If we do not start this in prayer, it will fail. And when I mean my prayer, I mean real, true intercessory prayer. And if I'm going to touch on it on Sunday, but what real intercessory prayer means, you're willing to stand in the gap. And there's a cost involved in willing to stand in the gap. But I'm excited, right? Because, so that's the plan, right? What's your feedback? Would it be okay to turn a Wednesday night, maybe in 2 weeks' time, to turn a Wednesday night into a night of prayer? You've come right at the end, Jan. We're just about finishing up. I said, okay, that's good. You make it when you make it, right? Sorry, somebody yelled something out from the back.
I was saying it was a good idea for the evening of prayer, after the Bible study.
Yeah. You sound that's good? On a Wednesday night in 2 weeks' time, right? I'm going to preach. Go ahead, Amy. We can do it out there. We can do. Well, there's two points. There's two things I want to do.
Some can pray outside and inside.
Well, there's right, but there's two things I want to do. There's prayer in here, which is intercessory prayer, where I want to pray for the individuals, for the church, for the community out here, and then for the world, right, for our country, and then for the world. But then I want to go out there and pray. That's another prayer march, right? Prayer walking. I have had 3 people. Yes, I've had 3 people come to me from other places who said, "Do you want to be part of walking around and praying?" Right? In this area, all around here, right? And so I want that to happen. But I also want a dedicated night where we are going to pray. That's the foundation of this, right?
I'm down.
You're down.
We can make it a monthly thing.
A monthly thing. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Lisa.
Not every night, that's what we do. It's prayer night.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. That's where I want to get to. A regular prayer night where we are praying. See, I have some friends. Have anybody heard of the International House of Prayer? Has anybody heard of that? There's one in Kansas City. Have anybody heard of the International House of Prayer? No? Okay. I have some friends from England who are part of that. They're in Kansas, and they have a model where they will have 24 hours of prayer. Yeah. But what they do is that they do it in shifts, right? So what do they do at Emmaus? In shifts, right? So we do the same, right? Maybe one time we'll just say that we have a dedicated 24 hours of prayer that people sign up for. I'm going to pray from 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock in the morning. Right?
Isn't that a form of fasting?
I can't.
Fasting? Is that a form of fasting?
Is that a form of fasting? Good question. No. Because Jesus talked about prayer and fasting. They are two distinct things, right? Yeah.
If you're talking about doing it in shifts, if it's like 9 to 12, I'm asking, I'm trying to get clarification on something.
You can fast and pray at the same time. Yep. You can fast and pray at the same time.
Well, if you're praying for like an hour, you're fasting from TV.
You know what
Yeah.
I was told once? I was told that whenever you're starting to do a fast, that whenever you get hungry or thirsty or whatever, that's when you're supposed to pray.
Yeah. 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 We'll have something one night where we'll get into prayer and fasting, what prayer and fasting really looks like for a church, for an individual and for a church. That's coming down the line, right? Leslie, what are you doing? Oh, it's a water bug. Yes, they're our friends. Oh, excuse me, excuse me. Excuse me. Let's quieten down. What's it done to you, Leslie? Yes. Yes. Yes, I did. I mentioned a little bit about that because I talked about Pastor Mark in here. You can watch this tonight because it's on YouTube or it's on Facebook. Okay, can we all settle down in here, children? Yes. I just want to say that, Rex, let's calm down, calm down. It was only a water bug. It wasn't nothing dangerous. 2 water bugs. All right. All right, let's close out, okay? So let me, just 1 second. So we've agreed that we're going to have a night of prayer and we're also going to have a prayer walk, right? Okay. And we're going to start to try to move to maybe a monthly prayer meeting once a month, correct? Okay. And then at some point we're going to try to have a 24-hour prayer day, right? Where we will have people signed up for praying during the day, right? Okay. Good. And hopefully next Sunday, John 17, right, that will help us prepare what real intercessory prayer is, right? So I'm excited, because this is what we have to do. We have to start the foundation. The foundation must be prayer in this church. I want us to be known as a praying church. Okay, and I'm not criticizing that we haven't been, but I'm going to say what I want it to be, right? So we're all on board, yeah? Okay, good stuff. All right, so let's pray. Father, I just want to thank you for the Timothys in our lives, the people who genuinely care for us, who show up when it costs them something, who make our walk with you feel possible. And I want to thank you for Epaphroditus too in our lives, the ones who served quietly, who took the long trip, who risked something that we may never fully see so that we could just be loved. We see ourselves in this passage, and sometimes we're the receivers and sometimes we're the called. But I ask you to make us into people just like that. Not famous, not impressive, but just faithful. Look at not only to our own interests, but to the interests of the people that you've placed around us and in our lives. And when we're poured out, help us not to count the cost, help us not to need recognition, and help us not to draw back. And help us to follow the one who poured himself out for us first.